Hey guys, tonight we drift into a place colder than fear itself. A valley of ice and silence known to the men who fought there as Frozen Hell. It's early December 1950, and you're crouched on a ridge high above Lake Changjin, what the maps call the Chosin Reservoir. The wind doesn't just cut, it screams. It chews at your skin, turns breath into crystals, and freezes sweat before it can fall. Around you, the Marines of Fox Company huddle in foxholes scratched from rock so hard it breaks shovels. Somewhere beyond the white blur of snow, an army you can't see but can almost feel. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers are getting ready to erase you from the map. You adjust your rifle, and it's like handling a block of steel fresh from a freezer. Lubricant has turned to glue. Weapons jam if you breathe wrong. The temperature's 40 below, and your canteen water is a brick of ice. The only warmth comes from the faint ember of a Lucky Strike cupped in frozen fingers, or maybe from the thought that dawn might bring something better. But here's the truth, it won't. You probably won't survive this night, or at least that's what it feels like. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing where you all tune in from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've been on this frozen ridge for days now. The same patch of cursed ground Captain William Barber insists must not fall. Fox Company, 246 strong, has been ordered to hold this tiny bump of a hill called Tok Tong Pass. It doesn't look like much, but it's the only lifeline connecting the Marines farther north at Udom Ni, with the rest of the 1st Marine Division to the south. Lose this ridge, and the entire division could be trapped, swallowed by the mountains and the cold. So you dig, you wait, you shiver, and you pray your fingers stay attached long enough to pull a trigger when the time comes. Night falls early in Korea. The sun barely kisses the horizon before it vanishes, and the mountains become shadows upon shadows. That's when they come. At first, just whispers of movement across the snow. Someone mutters that it's the wind. Then the wind starts blowing bugles, thousands of them, shrill, eerie, rising from every valley like ghosts. The Chinese are announcing themselves, not hiding, not sneaking, but celebrating their attack. And suddenly, the ridge explodes. Tracer fire tears through the darkness, cutting brief red and green streaks into the snowstorm. The air fills with the slap of bullets and the hollow pops of grenades. You fire back, but half your rounds misfire. The oil's frozen stiff. A machine gun jams, and you hear someone curse the way a priest says a prayer. Quiet, hopeless, inevitable. Captain Barber's voice cuts through the chaos, calm as ever. Hold your fire until you see them. And then you do. Dark figures flowing over the snow like ink in water. Hundreds of them. Bayonets gleaming under the flare light. You pull the trigger until your finger sticks to the metal. You lose count of how many you've dropped, or maybe how many times your weapon's frozen mid-burst. Every time you duck behind your trench wall, ice breaks from your helmet. The snow's no longer white, it's gray with smoke and blood. But somehow, impossibly, the line holds. The Chinese keep coming, wave after wave, but Fox Company stays rooted. Just another night in paradise, someone jokes through chattering teeth, and everyone laughs because that's the only sane reaction to madness. By morning, silence falls again. You peek over the trench and see a field of stillness. Hundreds of shapes litter the slope, some frozen mid-crawl, some sitting upright as if alive. They look like wax figures from a museum of war. The snow keeps falling, covering their faces, turning them into part of the mountain. The smell of gunpowder and frost mixes with something metallic, something final. A corpsman comes by to check on frostbite cases. Your buddy has blackened fingers, and the doc just shakes his head and says, "You're lucky. You'll get to keep most of them." He says it like he's talking about poker chips. A hot meal is a tin of beans so cold it crunches. The quirky part? Some guys heat their rations by setting them next to their bodies for hours. just to soften them enough to eat. Historians still argue whether the cold or the enemy was the greater killer at Chosin. But for the men here, that debate's academic. Both are merciless. You think about how you got here. 3 months ago, you were back in the south, celebrating the victory at Incheon. Everyone said the war was almost over, home by Christmas. You remember that phrase like a joke now. The 1st Marine Division had been heroes, smashing through North Korean lines, pushing north past Pyongyang, chasing what was left of the enemy. Even the president said it was time to finish the job. You marched toward the Yalu River, the Chinese border, with banners flying and cameras rolling. But up here, near this frozen lake, it's different. The hills are empty of villagers. The roads twist through narrow passes that feel like ambush invitations. The engineers whisper that their bulldozers keep breaking down in the cold, and yet headquarters insists there are no large enemy forces nearby. Just volunteers, a few thousand maybe. You wonder if the people making those reports have ever spent a night on a mountain in Korea. The radio crackles with rumors. Patrols vanish into the snow. A recon team returns shaking, swearing they saw entire regiments moving under cover of darkness. They're ghosts, someone says, but ghosts don't leave footprints, and these did. That was the week before all hell broke loose. Now huddled on this ridge, you're part of something no one planned for. An entire army trapped in ice. It's not just Fox Company. The 1st Marine Division, Task Force 31, the remnants of the 7th Infantry Division, a few British Royal Marines, and South Koreans, all scattered in pockets around the reservoir, all surrounded by the People's Volunteer Army, as the Chinese call themselves. Over 300,000 of them. For perspective, that's roughly the population of a mid-sized American city, against maybe 30,000 UN troops. You don't know those numbers yet, not really, but you can feel them. Every gust of wind sounds like marching feet. Every shadow looks like movement. You're caught between mountains, snow, and an enemy who seems to multiply in the dark. A lieutenant jokes that the army should have brought penguins instead of tanks, since the tracks keep freezing solid. Someone else swears they saw a Jeep's radiator explode into steam and instantly freeze into an icicle waterfall. You laugh because it's better than crying, and besides, it's true. Still, amid the exhaustion and the cold, there's something else. Pride. You look at the men around you, men with cracked lips, frostbitten hands, rifles taped together, and realize you're part of something bigger than survival. Every hour you hold this ridge buys time for the others. Every shot you fire keeps that lifeline open a little longer. As night creeps back over the reservoir, Captain Barber walks the line, stopping to pat shoulders, check weapons, murmur encouragement. He looks like a man carved from ice, his breath glowing in the flare light. You think maybe he's superhuman, until you notice his limp, the frost rimming his eyelashes. He's just as mortal as the rest of you, but he believes this hill can be held, and somehow, that belief keeps you all standing. You settle into your frozen trench again, rifle across your lap, eyes scanning the snowfields that stretch endlessly in every direction. The wind picks up, carrying that haunting, distant music, the sound of Chinese bugles, echoing through the valleys like something ancient and inescapable. You know what it means. You breathe out once, watch your breath freeze, and whisper to yourself, "Here they come again." Snow crunches under your boots as you stamp life back into your feet. The sun rises weakly, painting the ridges pink and gray, but there's no warmth in it, only the illusion of dawn. Somewhere below, Lake Changjin lies hidden under a sheet of ice thick enough to hold trucks, but treacherous enough to swallow the ones that stray too far from the tracks. You can see your breath hang in the air like smoke from a fire that never warms. The cold isn't the backdrop anymore, it's a weapon. It's hard to believe this nightmare began with triumph. Just a few months ago, back in September 1950, you were cheering the news from Incheon. General Douglas MacArthur had pulled off what everyone called a masterstroke. a surprise amphibious landing that smashed through North Korean defenses and turned the war around. Seoul was liberated within weeks. The North Korean army crumbled, and the once desperate United Nations command now found itself driving north with unstoppable momentum. "We'll be home by Christmas," someone said, and everyone believed it. You were part of the Great Advance, pushing past Pyongyang, watching North Korean prisoners shuffle south in endless lines. The hills were alive with optimism and radio chatter, the kind of manic confidence only victors know. You ate hot chow back then, laughed about Tokyo girls and American jukeboxes, and talked about the medals you'd pin on your jackets when you got home. Even the officers started to smile again. Then came the order. Push to the Yalu River, the border with China. The dream of a unified Korea was too tempting to resist. MacArthur insisted the war was nearly over. Intelligence briefings downplayed Chinese involvement. "A few volunteers," they said. "Nothing serious." A few. You wish you could go back and count them again. The Marines began their march through the mountains of North Korea in late November. The terrain looked like another planet. Razor-backed ridges, frozen rivers, forests of black pine clawing at the sky. The roads were little more than goat trails carved into cliffs. Your convoy wound through them, trucks straining, engines coughing frost. Every bridge seemed ready to collapse under the weight of supplies, and every curve in the road felt like a sniper's dream. Still, you moved forward. Udom-ni, Hagaru-ri, Koto-ri, small names that would soon become etched into military history and nightmares alike. As you marched north, the civilian world disappeared. The few villages you passed were empty, the windows nailed shut, doors hanging loose. Dogs howled from a distance, but you never saw them. It was like walking through a country that had decided to quit being alive. The locals had fled, or worse, been warned to leave. Even then, the signs were there. The sudden silence of the hills, the strange tracks in the snow, the whispers carried down the line. The first real clue came from the South Korean scouts. They spoke of enemy columns seen at night. Hundreds, maybe thousands of Chinese soldiers moving silently through the hills, wearing padded cotton uniforms the color of dust. You didn't want to believe it. The brass didn't either. Rumors, they said. They wouldn't dare, but they did. Historians still argue whether Mao's decision to intervene was inevitable or suicidal. Some say he wanted to protect the Yalu River, fearing an American invasion of Manchuria. Others claim he wanted to prove that China was back, a new power not to be bullied by the West. Whatever his reason, the result was the same. 300,000 Chinese soldiers crossed the border under the cover of darkness, using mountain trails and frozen riverbeds. Entire divisions moved unseen by air reconnaissance, invisible beneath the snow. And the UN forces? They were strung out along a single, narrow road, like pearls on a string waiting to be cut. At the time, you didn't know those numbers. You only knew what you saw. The sudden increase in gunfire at night, the distant bugles, the sense that the mountains themselves were watching you. You'd stop to rest and feel eyes on your back. Even the wind seemed different, carrying whispers in Mandarin. The first firefights began on the outskirts of Udom-ni. Small groups of Chinese troops ambushed convoys, struck from ridgelines, and vanished. The attacks felt like tests, probing for weakness. When the real assault came, it was like the world falling apart. Late November 27th, you were huddled by a campfire, thawing your socks over a can of Sterno. Suddenly, bugles sounded from every direction. A second later, mortars began falling like iron rain. Chinese infantry surged out of the dark, moving in human waves, hundreds of figures flowing over the snow, their padded jackets blending perfectly with the terrain. You fired into them until the barrel glowed, but for every one that fell, 2 more seemed to rise. By dawn, the 1st Marine Division realized what had happened. They weren't attacking. They were surrounded. The shock spread fast. Radio lines crackled with disbelief. General Oliver P. Smith, the Marine commander, famously muttered, "Retreat? Hell. We're just attacking in another direction." That phrase became legend, but at the time, it was equal parts courage and grim humor. You couldn't retreat in any normal sense. There was only one road south, and the Chinese were on it. Supplies began running low. The cold claimed more men than bullets. Engines refused to start. Morphine froze solid in its syringes. A quirky little fact: the Marines discovered that urinating on the bolts of their rifles could sometimes thaw them enough to fire. Just one of the 1,000 indignities of surviving a winter war. For days, the division fought to regroup. Hagaruri became the central base, a makeshift airstrip hacked out of frozen ground under constant attack. There, engineers worked by floodlight and sheer stubbornness to carve out a lifeline. C-47 transports began flying in supplies, landing on half-frozen runways while machine guns rattled in the distance. Every box of ammo, every crate of food was a miracle. Farther north, Fox Company's ridge loomed above the pass like a frozen scar. You didn't know it yet, but your position, Tuktong Pass, was the key to the entire withdrawal. Without it, the route south would collapse, and that's exactly what the Chinese were counting on. Meanwhile, the rest of the division faced their own nightmare. Units tried to break through ambushes along the road. Trucks slid off cliffs. Stretchers piled up at aid stations. Pilots flying low over the reservoir reported endless movement. Chinese columns threading through valleys like rivers of ants. Historians still argue whether it was 60,000 or 120,000 encircling the Marines. But to you, it might as well have been the entire Red Army. At night, you could see the glow of their campfires flickering on the hillsides, surrounding you like stars that burned too close. Every man watching them knew this wasn't a war of strategy anymore. It was a war of survival. Your captain gathered the platoon, his breath misting in the flare light. "We hold this ground," he said, voice steady, "because if we don't, no one goes home." He paused, looking at each of you. "We're not frozen. We're anchored. Remember that." And somehow, that word, anchored, stuck. It became your mantra. As the snow deepened and rations shrank, humor became your other weapon. Someone carved a snowman wearing a helmet and stuck a rifle in its twig arms. Someone else named it MacArthur's Ghost. A radio operator decorated the antenna with tinsel from a care package, calling it the Christmas line. You all laughed, even as frostbite crept up your fingers. It was absurd, defiant, and very human, because in that frozen hell, laughter was rebellion. And yet, beneath the jokes, everyone knew what was coming. The Chinese weren't finished. They were regrouping for the next strike. Somewhere beyond those ridges, bugles waited to scream again. And when they did, Fox Company's ridge would be the first to feel it. You clean your weapon again, trying not to think about how the oil has frozen. Your gloves are stiff as cardboard. You flex your fingers and imagine a warm kitchen somewhere back home, coffee steaming, radio playing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Then you hear a distant horn echo through the valley, and the memory fades. The cold deepens, the horizon darkens, and once again, the wind begins to sing in Mandarin. The mountain air feels heavier tonight, as if the atmosphere itself knows what's coming. You're standing knee-deep in snow beside a half-buried sandbag wall, rubbing your hands together until the skin burns. The wind claws through every layer of your clothing. Your parka might as well be tissue paper. Out across the valley, the peaks glow faintly blue under a cloudless moon. Beautiful in that indifferent way nature sometimes is before it kills you. The stillness is unnerving. The gunfire that had raked the ridge earlier has faded to nothing, replaced by a kind of muffled quiet that presses against your eardrums. Too quiet, someone mutters. They're right. It's the kind of silence that never lasts. You can almost feel them out there. The Chinese soldiers, invisible in the dark, watching from the tree lines. The Marines have started calling them ghosts. You remember how the first patrols vanished 2 nights ago? No shots, no screams, just gone. The next morning, the snow around their last known position was pocked with strange footprints that came and went like smoke trails. You look toward the frozen lake. The ice shines like metal under the moonlight, stretching into infinity. Trucks are parked along the shoreline, silent shapes rimmed in frost. Somewhere beyond that horizon lies China itself, so close you could almost walk there if you were feeling suicidal. But you don't have time to think about geopolitics. You're just trying to keep your fingers from freezing together. A lieutenant moves along the trench line, whispering orders. Stay low. Check ammo. No lights. You can hear the faint clicking of bolts as rifles are tested, the metallic cough of a Thompson being cleared. Each sound feels dangerously loud in the still air. A runner from HQ arrives breathless, snow-caked in his eyebrows. Scouts report movement east of the pass, he says. Could be a probing attack. The lieutenant grimaces. Everyone knows what that means. Another night of bugles and screaming. You try to smile, say something clever, but the words freeze halfway out of your mouth. The truth is, the men are exhausted. No one has slept more than an hour at a time. The rations are frozen blocks of misery. The coffee tastes like antifreeze, and frostbite has already claimed a few toes here and there. The corpsman says he's out of morphine again. The supply drops are getting harder to reach through the storm. Yet despite it all, there's something almost serene about these moments before the attack. This strange calm when the snow muffles every sound and your heartbeats feel too loud. You look at the stars, pinpricks of fire in a black sky, and for a second, you remember what it felt like to be somewhere warm. Maybe home, maybe just not here. Then, without warning, a bugle shrieks from the hills. Another answers, then 10 more. It's like the mountains themselves are screaming. You can see flashes in the distance, muzzle flares, mortars launching, the sudden arc of tracer rounds slicing through the dark. Here we go, someone yells. The first wave hits from the east. They come out of the night like a living avalanche. Hundreds of silhouettes, each carrying a rifle or submachine gun, charging down the slope. Their padded uniforms make them almost silent, except for the crunch of snow and the haunting chorus of whistles and shouts. You open fire. Everyone does. The ridge becomes a thunderstorm of sound. M1 rifles cracking, BARs chattering, grenades thumping into the snowpack. The air fills with smoke, snow, and fragments of ice. For every man who falls, another takes his place. It's like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. They keep coming. Fearless or insane, you can't tell which. At one point, a flare lights up the slope and you see their faces clearly for the first time. Young, frost-whitened, eyes fixed forward. They're close enough to throw grenades now. You duck, feel the shockwave in your chest. The ground shakes. Hold the line! Captain Barber's voice cuts through the chaos, somehow calm. Don't let them take that ridge. You fire until the bolt locks open. Reload, fire again. Somewhere to your left, a machine gun jams, and two Marines scramble to clear it with bare hands, skin sticking to the freezing metal. You hurl another grenade downhill. Feel the dull thud in your bones. The world has become flashes of light and sound, framed by the icy breath of hell itself. Then, almost as suddenly as it began, the attack falters. The survivors fade back into the dark, dragging their wounded with them. The bugles stop. The snow begins to fall again, slow and soft, as if the sky's trying to bury the evidence. You slump against your trench wall, panting clouds of steam. The ground around you looks like a battlefield from another century. Bodies half buried in snow, rifles frozen upright, helmets lying like dark stones. The corpsmen move among them, their breath haloed in lantern light. Someone hums a hymn quietly. It's not even midnight. Everyone knows they'll be back. The hours crawl by. You huddle with two others under a torn poncho, passing a chocolate bar between you like contraband gold. One guy says he used to work in a butcher shop in Ohio. He never thought he'd miss the smell of raw meat. The other swears he's going to open a diner when this is over and serve anything but beans. The jokes are bad, the laughter brittle. But laughter, even brittle, keeps you human. A few yards away, a frozen Chinese soldier sits upright against a rock, eyes glazed over, snow collecting on his cap. You can't tell if he's 20 or 40. The cold has erased age. You look at him and wonder if he felt the same fear you did when the bugle sounded, if he too was promised a quick victory and a warm homecoming. Historians still argue whether the Chinese assault at Chosin was meant to annihilate the UN forces or simply drive them back from the Yalu. The truth is probably both, but for you, the distinction doesn't matter. All you know is that the enemy is everywhere and that the weather itself is working for them. Around 3 a.m., you hear another sound. Low engines, faint at first. A small convoy of jeeps and half-tracks creeps up the road below, bringing reinforcements. The men cheer softly. Even a handful of new faces feels like salvation. But the newcomers look around, see the bodies and the frostbite, and realize what kind of hell they've stepped into. One of them jokes, "I thought Korea was supposed to be tropical." Nobody laughs. You watch as the medics load the wounded onto stretchers. Some of the injured protest. They don't want to leave their positions. "I can still shoot with my left," one insists. The doc just shakes his head and covers him with a blanket. By dawn, the snow has stopped falling. The landscape is eerily beautiful again, clean, white, untouched. If not for the black scars of shell bursts and the frozen silhouettes in the distance, you might think the night's horrors were a dream, but the smell tells you otherwise. Burnt powder, frozen blood, engine oil, and death. It's a scent that never leaves you, no matter how many winters come after. You step out of your trench to stretch your legs, feeling your knees creak like old wood. The ridge slopes downward into the valley, where smoke rises in lazy columns from the Chinese positions. You wonder how many of them survive the night. You wonder how many of you will survive the next. A corporal approaches, face hidden behind a scarf. "HQ says we're holding," he reports. "Divisions consolidating at Hagaruri. Airdrops coming this afternoon, weather permitting." "Weather permitting," you repeat, almost laughing, as if the weather were a person you could reason with. You look up at the sky. It's so blue, it hurts your eyes. And just for a second, you imagine the whole place thawed. The lake glittering, the trees alive again, the mountains green. Then a gust of wind rips through the pass, carrying with it that faint, distant sound, a bugle note, lonely and sharp. You grip your rifle tighter, because you know what that means. Night is coming again. When the next sunset bleeds across the peaks, you already know what it means. The sky turns crimson over the Chosin Hills, and every man on the ridge feels that knot in his stomach, the one that comes before the storm. You sit on your pack and chip ice from your rifle's sight. Around you, the other Marines are ghosts wrapped in parkas, faces gray, breath rising in little clouds. The air smells faintly of kerosene and cordite, like the world's coldest mechanic shop. Orders have just come down from Captain Barber. No one moves, no one fires until the signal. It's the same instruction every night. The enemy has a pattern: silence, then sound, then a flood of humanity crashing uphill. You know it's coming, you just don't know when. Below the ridge, the reservoir glints under the moonlight, an unbroken sheet of glass, black and silver. The mountains loom around it like the ribs of some ancient creature, all bone and ice. The engineers say the Chinese used those ridges to sneak entire regiments unseen, filtering through valleys, cutting the UN columns to pieces. You believe it. The terrain here seems built for ambushes, narrow defiles, blind turns, steep ravines where sound dies before it travels. You lean against the trench wall and think back to the training films about cold weather warfare. None of them mentioned that your eyelids could freeze together if you blink too slow. None warned you that blood in the snow freezes so fast it looks like shattered glass. Someone passes a canteen your way. Inside isn't water. It's melted snow mixed with instant coffee, tasting like ash and gasoline. You sip anyway. Hydration is life here, and comfort is an extinct word. Then, the stillness breaks. A single crack echoes from the eastern slope, a rifle shot, maybe accidental. Then another, then a bugle. The night erupts. From the tree line below, Flares burst like dying stars, casting the whole ridge in white light. You can see them coming again, thousands this time. Dark figures surging uphill, bugles screaming, mortars thudding. The sound is animal, a deep collective roar that drowns thought. You grab your weapon and open fire. The recoil kicks against your shoulder like a hammer. Tracer rounds carve glowing arcs through the snow. You see a line of Chinese soldiers drop, then another line behind them simply step over the bodies and keep coming. It's madness, a kind of disciplined insanity. They're close enough now that you can hear their voices, their boots crunching the ice, the dry clack of grenades being armed.
"Hold steady," someone shouts. "Pick your targets."
The Marines fire until their barrels steam. Mortar rounds burst overhead, showering the ridge with shards of frozen earth. You hear a scream to your right. A medic, maybe. But there's no time to look. A machine gun jams, and you dive beside it, wrenching the bolt with numb fingers until it slams free again. The next burst cuts through a column of attackers at 20 yards. The snow explodes red. For a few moments, it feels like the world is nothing but noise. Gunfire, explosions, the shrill wailing of the wounded. But gradually, the wave thins. The bugles fade. The ridge is still yours. When silence returns, it's almost unbearable. You sit back, shaking, your breath fogging the air. The snow around you is littered with casings and torn fabric. Down the slope, dark mounds mark where the enemy fell. There's no triumph in it, only exhaustion. "Hell of a party," mutters a corporal beside you. His eyebrows are rimed with ice, his cheeks cracked and bleeding from the cold. You laugh weakly. "We should start charging admission." The humor barely holds. When dawn creeps up, the ridge looks like the aftermath of a storm. Dead men, yours and theirs, lie half buried in drifts. The medics move among them silently, tagging those who still breathe. You help carry a wounded private to the aid tent. His boots clink as you set him down, frozen solid. The corpsman saws them off with a knife and says, "Don't worry, kid. You'll walk again." You both know it's a lie. Outside, someone's trying to thaw rations with a flamethrower. It works, kind of. The stew hisses and boils, and for the first time in days, the smell of hot food cuts through the gunpowder and smoke. The men gather like moths around the flame. A lieutenant radios headquarters for updates. The word that comes back isn't comforting. The Chinese have encircled nearly all units around the reservoir. Supply lines are shredded. Hagaruri, the base south of you, is under constant shell fire. The only road out is the one you're guarding, Toktong Pass. Lose it, and the division dies here. "Guess that makes us famous," someone says.
"Or doomed,"
replies another. Historians still debate whether the 1st Marine Division was trapped because of overconfidence or miscommunication. Some say MacArthur refused to believe the Chinese would risk open war. Others blame faulty intelligence that underestimated their numbers. You don't care. Theories don't keep you warm. Theories don't drag ammo up a frozen hill at midnight. By afternoon, the sky darkens again. Snow begins to fall in lazy flakes, soft and soundless. The kind that makes you forget there's a war at all. You watch it drift down on your rifle, your hands, your helmet, a clean, white shroud settling over everything. For a moment, it almost feels peaceful. Then you notice movement below. Single figures darting between rocks. Scouts. The next wave is forming. You shake the snow off your gun, slap your buddy on the shoulder, and mutter, "Here we go again." The assault that night is worse. The Chinese switch tactics. They come in smaller groups, using the terrain for cover, trying to crawl right up to the trenches. You catch glimpses of them only when flares go off, their shadows stretching long across the snow. Some carry satchel charges, others use grenades tied together with wire. The fighting becomes close. Hand grenades, bayonets, frozen fists. At one point, a Chinese soldier leaps into the trench beside you. He's young, barely more than a boy, face half covered in frost. Instinct takes over. You both grapple in silence, breath fogging. knives flashing. When it's over, you're shaking. Not from cold, but from the realization that he looked terrified too. After the attack finally breaks, you find yourself staring at your hands, wondering when they started trembling. The ridge is scarred, the snow churned into red slush. But the line still holds. It always holds. Sometime near dawn, Captain Barber gathers what's left of the platoon. "We've done what no one thought possible," he says hoarsely. "The division knows what you've done here. Relief's coming." Relief. The word sounds like a rumor, but you cling to it anyway. He tells you to rest. You lie back in your foxhole, staring at the paling sky. Your eyelids ache to close, but you're afraid they'll freeze shut if you do. Somewhere behind you, a phonograph scratches out a tune. One of the guys found an old record in a bombed village. The song is, "I'll Be Home for Christmas." The needle skips every few seconds, and the words stutter out like a broken promise. For a long time, no one says anything. Just the song, the wind, and the memory of bugles echoing off frozen stone. You realize then that this is what the historians will never capture. Not the numbers, not the strategy, not the debates about who blundered and who didn't. What they'll miss is the feeling of it, the way the air itself seemed to hum with danger, the way courage and exhaustion became the same thing. The ridge creaks under the weight of snow, the fires burn low, and once again, you wait. Because waiting, here, is the same as fighting. By the fourth night, the ridge feels like the edge of the world, a frozen fortress of snow and silence, carved out of exhaustion and willpower. You can't remember the last time you felt your toes, or the last time the wind didn't sound like it was whispering your name. The Marines call this Fox Hill now, though no one remembers who said it first. It's just easier than saying that God-forsaken outcropping above Tuktong Pass where everything freezes, burns, or dies. You start to lose track of time. The sun rises, sets, and rises again, but it makes no difference. The cold stays the same. Each day is a repeat of the one before. Dig, shoot, thaw, repeat. The only thing that changes is the number of men still standing. Captain Barber moves like a ghost between the foxholes. His face is a study in contradiction. Calm voice, cracked lips, ice hanging from his eyebrows. He walks with a limp now. A mortar fragment got him 2 nights ago, but he waves off the medic. "I'll rest when the relief column gets here," he says. Nobody argues. When daylight hits, you look down the slope and see the aftermath of last night's fight. The snow has turned a mottled gray from soot and blood. Weapons lie scattered like sticks after a storm. The Chinese dead are still out there, half buried by the wind. No one dares go down to collect them. It's too dangerous, and besides, the ground's too hard to dig graves. So the snow becomes their tombstone. A few yards away, a Marine is trying to light a cigarette, shielding the flame with cupped hands. The lighter sputters, the flame flickers, and then dies. He laughs softly. "Even fire freezes here," he says. You can't tell if it's a joke or a prayer. You take stock of your own condition. Fingers wrapped in tape, boots lined with newspaper, a scarf that's more ice than fabric. You're running low on everything: ammunition, rations, even hope. But the radio crackles with one piece of news worth holding on to. A relief force is coming from Hagaru-ri. They call themselves the Ridge Runners. It'll take them a day, maybe 2, to reach you, assuming they survive the ambushes along the road. You want to believe that. You have to. Until then, you keep holding. Around noon, the air stirs with a distant droning sound. Aircraft. You look up and see tiny specks moving against the clouds. The sound builds into a roar. Everyone cheers weakly. Supply planes, the first you've seen in days. Parachutes bloom overhead like flowers in a frozen garden, dropping crates that hit the snow with muffled thuds. Ammunition, food, medical supplies. Salvation from the sky. The men scramble to collect what they can, laughing, shouting, slipping on the ice. It's like Christmas morning for people who've forgotten what warmth feels like. Someone unpacks a crate of sea rations and finds a bar of chocolate. It's rock hard, nearly inedible, but you take a bite anyway.
It tastes like home. The elation doesn't last. Mortar shells start landing within minutes. The Chinese are watching, waiting for exactly this moment. The first explosion flips a jeep like a toy. The second shatters a stack of supply boxes. You dive for cover as shrapnel winds overhead. The snow fills the air like smoke, the world turning white on white. When the barrage stops, the ground is cratered, the new supplies scattered. You find half a case of ammo buried under debris, bent but usable. You drag it back to your position, panting clouds. The others are already setting up for the next wave, cleaning weapons, patching wounds, checking lines of fire. No one speaks much anymore. Words take energy, and energy is worth more than gold here. That night, the wind howls down from the peaks with a vengeance. It cuts through your parka like knives, carrying the sharp scent of cordite and something sweet. Burned rations, maybe. You press your scarf tighter around your mouth, but it's no use. The cold finds its way in. It always does. Then, faintly, you hear it again. The bugles. They start distant this time, almost mournful, echoing off the lake. You can't tell how many. Then drums join in, a rhythm like marching feet. The sound grows louder, closer, until the entire ridge hums with it. The attack begins in 3 directions at once. From the north, Chinese infantry storm the slope with terrifying precision, firing from the hip as they advance. From the east, mortars rain down on your trenches, and from the west, machine gun fire rakes the ridge, pinning you in place. It's chaos, pure and simple. You fire until your rifle's too hot to hold. The man next to you screams as a shell explodes nearby, showering you both with rock shards. You can't hear anything but ringing. Then through the haze, you see something impossible. The enemy climbing over their own fallen to reach you. It's as if death itself can't stop them. The Marines fall back 10 yards, then 10 more. Every foot of ground costs a life. You throw grenades until your arms ache, your fingers blistered through your gloves. The snow glows orange in the light of burning crates. Someone yells, "Fix bayonets!" And suddenly you're face to face with the enemy again. It's all motion, heat, and fury, the smell of sweat and gun oil mixing with the freezing air. And then, silence. It happens fast. One moment, you're fighting hand to hand. The next, the Chinese are retreating. The bugles switch to a different tune, slower, almost mournful. You're too exhausted to chase. You just slump back into the snow, chest heaving, rifle slipping from your hands. A medic crawls over, checks your leg where shrapnel grazed you. "You'll live," he says. "Lucky you." You glance around. The ridge is barely recognizable now, pockmarked, smoldering, littered with torn canvas. You count heads and realize half the company's gone, either dead, missing, or too wounded to fight. The radio operator's trying to raise Hagaruri, voice trembling with static. Captain Barber finally sits down beside you, legs stretched, face pale. "They're trying to cut us off completely," he says quietly, "but we're still here." He grins, the kind of grin only men surrounded on all sides can manage. "They'll remember Fox Company," he adds, and you know he's right. As dawn breaks, you climb out of the trench and look down the pass. Far below, you can see smoke rising from where the relief column's supposed to be. The sight stirs something inside you. Hope, disbelief, maybe both. They're fighting their way toward you. Historians still debate what kept Fox Company from breaking that week. Some say it was discipline, others divine intervention. But every man who was there will tell you the same thing. It was loyalty. You couldn't abandon the guy next to you. Not in that cold, not in that silence. The sky brightens into a pale gold, and for the first time in days, the wind dies down. You can hear the faint rattle of distant gunfire, and then, unmistakably, the low growl of engines. Relief. You blink against the snow glare, half convinced it's a mirage. But no, figures are moving up the road, small at first, then larger. Trucks, tanks. The ridge runners have arrived. You don't cheer right away. You just stand there, numb, staring as they crest the ridge, their faces gaunt and wind-burned.
just like yours. When one of them waves, you finally lift your arm, half laughing, half crying.
You've done it. You've held the pass. But deep down, you know the ordeal isn't over. Holding the ridge was only the beginning. Now comes the hardest part, getting out. When the first tanks of the ridge runners grind into view, you barely recognize them. Their paint is faded, their hulls crusted with frost. The Marines riding atop them look like survivors of another century. Eyes hollow, cheeks blackened with windburn, uniforms layered with ice and grime. But to you, they might as well be angels. You stumble out of your foxhole, waving a mittened hand. Someone waves back. For a brief, flickering moment, you feel the warmth of something close to victory. The relief column has clawed its way through 30 miles of ambushes, frozen rivers, and blown bridges to reach you. Trucks follow the tanks, engines growling, each one carrying ammo, food, and the wounded. Some of the drivers are Army, some Marine, a few even South Korean. No one cares about the uniforms now. All that matters is that they made it. Captain Barber limps forward to greet the lead officer, a grizzled major with frost in his mustache. The two men shake hands without words. Then Barber gestures toward the valley below, still crawling with Chinese movements, and says flatly, "We can't hold much longer." The major nods. "We're not holding. We're pulling everyone out." That word, pulling, hits differently. You've spent days believing this ridge was the center of the world, that holding it meant saving everyone else. Now you're told the plan is to withdraw. The realization takes a second to sink in. Withdrawal isn't surrender, not exactly, but it feels close enough to sting. Orders ripple down the line. Pack up, gather the wounded, destroy anything that can't be carried. You move automatically, numb fingers fumbling with frozen straps. The corpsmen load the most injured first, wrapping them in blankets that crackle from ice. You help lift a stretcher onto a truck, the man beneath whispering thanks you can barely hear. Then you grab your rifle, sling your pack, and start marching. The column snakes down the mountain road in a long, slow crawl. The air is thick with exhaust and breath, the engines chugging in rhythm like an iron heartbeat. The temperature hovers near 40 below. Every few minutes, someone slips on the ice. The truck's tires spin helplessly, chains rattling. Marines trudge beside them, rifles slung, boots crunching in the snow. It's not just Fox Company anymore. All along the route, shattered remnants of other units fall in. Men from the 7th Infantry Division, British Royal Marines, South Korean regiments. You pass faces you've never seen before and will never see again. Everyone looks the same, gray, hollow, frozen. Historians later call it a fighting withdrawal, but walking it feels more like a pilgrimage. You're not retreating, you're surviving. The Chinese know it too. They don't let up. Sniper fire cracks from the ridgelines. Mortar shells arc overhead, exploding in dull thumps that throw up fountains of ice. Sometimes the column halts to return fire, the machine gun stuttering in short, angry bursts. Other times, you just keep moving and hope luck holds. Somewhere ahead, a tank slides off the road and tumbles halfway down the slope. You watch it roll, metal shrieking, until it disappears into the snow. No one stops. You can't stop. The narrow road is the only artery left. Block it, and you die. "Keep moving," the sergeant growls. You stop, you freeze. You believe him. As night falls, the temperature plummets even lower. The wind slices through your coat, through your skin, into the bone. Every breath hurts. You wrap your scarf tighter, pull your cap down, keep marching. The man beside you starts humming White Christmas, his voice cracked but steady. Within minutes, a few others join in. The sound carries faintly down the line, absurdly beautiful in the middle of this desolation. Someone jokes that Bing Crosby himself would have turned back. Someone else mutters, "Even hell's warmer than this." A burst of gunfire answers from the hills. You dive for the ditch, heart hammering. The shots fade quickly, probing fire, nothing more. But your pulse doesn't slow. You've learned that quiet is just a prelude here. By dawn, you reach Hagadori. What was once a base is now a cratered ruin, half the tents burned, the airstrip pitted with shell holes.
Yet somehow, the engineers are still working, patching the runway with bulldozers and shovels. You watch as a C-47 plane comes in low, skimming the treetops before bumping down onto the rough ice. The men cheer weakly. It's proof that you're not forgotten. The camp buzzes with impossible energy. Mechanics hammer at engines, corpsmen tend to the wounded, pilots smoke beside their planes, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. In one corner, a Navy doctor amputates frostbitten limbs in a tent, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and cold metal. You turn away quickly. Captain Barber reports to headquarters, limping but upright. They tell him Fox Company's stand at Tuktong Pass saved thousands of lives. You hear that secondhand, whispered down the line. When he returns, he says nothing about medals or glory, only, "We did our job." For the first time, you get something close to real food. Lukewarm soup, biscuits, coffee that's almost hot. You can taste grease and grit in it, but it's divine. The cook jokes, "5-star dining, courtesy of the USMC." And everyone laughs, because laughter is still the best defense you have left. But you don't linger long. The withdrawal continues. The next destination, Kotori, 20 miles south. The route winds through more frozen passes, more ambush territory. Every step forward feels like earning your life again. That afternoon, the engineers at Hagaru-ri pull off something bordering on sorcery. You watch from the edge of the airfield as C-119, flying boxcars, drop bridge sections by parachute, giant metal panels floating down like silver angels. They land with heavy thuds, to be assembled later on the road ahead, where Chinese demolition has blown the original bridges apart. It's an audacious gamble, but in this war, miracles come wrapped in canvas and cable. Only the Marines would think to build a bridge by air, one officer mutters. The march resumes the next morning. The convoy stretches for miles, a crawling serpent of steel and men, its breath rising in clouds. The Chinese harry the rear constantly, hit-and-run attacks that bite and vanish before you can respond. Sometimes, fighter planes streak overhead, strafing the ridge lines to clear a path. The sound rattles your teeth, but you silently thank every pilot you see. At one point, you pass a village, what's left of one. Roofs burned, doors shattered, the snow inside the huts stained black. A single dog trots across the street and disappears into the trees. It's the first living civilian you've seen in weeks. You wonder what stories these mountains will tell after you're gone. By midday, the sun burns through the clouds, turning the snow blinding white. The glare hurts your eyes, but it's beautiful in a cruel way. You think of home again. Streets with Christmas lights, steam rising from coffee cups, radio announcers promising peace. And you can't help but wonder if they'll ever understand this place. This frozen valley where peace feels like a rumor. The column halts at a sharp bend overlooking the reservoir. From here you can see miles of mountains, their peaks hazy in the distance. Somewhere up there, the Chinese are regrouping. You can feel their presence like static in the air. The sergeant checks his map, shakes his head and mutters, "Long road left." You light a cigarette, hands shaking. The flame wavers in the wind, almost goes out, then catches. You take one slow drag and think, if I make it to the coast, I'm never complaining about summer heat again. That night, camped beside the road, you share a tin of beans with two others. The stars overhead are brilliant, almost cheerful. The mountains glow faintly blue in the moonlight. You're surrounded by death, but somehow, it's quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat. Think anyone will remember this? One of the guys asks. You look at the ridge behind you, the one Fox Company held against impossible odds, and nod. Yeah, you say. They'll remember. He grins, teeth flashing white in the dark. Good. Just making sure it was worth freezing for. You chuckle, and the sound echoes off the cliffs, small but defiant. Historians still debate whether the Chosin withdrawal was a defeat or one of the most extraordinary fighting retreats in military history. Some call it survival, others call it legend. But here, walking through the mountains, it's simpler than that. You're alive. The man beside you is alive. And as long as that's true, you keep moving. The morning after you leave Hagaru-ri, the world turns white again. Snow falls so thick it blurs the horizon into nothingness. The column crawls forward at a pace so slow it feels like standing still. Somewhere behind you, you can still see the smoke of burned supply dumps rising like gray ghosts over the valley. Ahead lies another pass, another trap waiting to spring. The men stop joking about the cold. It's too much effort even for sarcasm. You trudge behind a half-track, your boots crunching in rhythm with the engine's growl. The road twists along cliffs so narrow that one wrong step means a 1,000-foot drop. To your left, the Chosin Reservoir stretches like a frozen desert, silent and gleaming. To your right, the mountains loom, jagged, endless, hungry. You've never seen a landscape look so beautiful and so cruel at the same time. By mid-morning, the Chinese begin to harass the column again. Single snipers take shots from the ridges, the cracks echoing like breaking glass. Every man ducks automatically, even when the bullet's nowhere near. Sometimes the fire comes from ahead, sometimes from behind. The enemy's everywhere and nowhere, appearing like ghosts and vanishing back into the snow. The convoy halts after a bridge collapse blocks the road. Engineers swarm to the front, inspecting the damage, shaking their heads. You wait, stamping your feet, rubbing your hands together. Frostbite is the constant companion now. There's no escaping it. You can feel it nibbling at your toes, creeping up your fingers. The corpsman told you once that frostbite kills pain first, then flesh. That's supposed to be comforting, somehow. Someone nearby starts humming a tune. Quiet, broken, but recognizable. I'll be seeing you. It drifts through the line, picked up by a few more voices until the sound becomes a fragile thread holding the men together. After an hour, the engineers wave everyone back. The bridge isn't repairable. You can see the gaping hole where the planks fell through, the black river ice glittering below. The major in charge radios for help, voice strained, requesting aerial delivery bridge sections. Repeat, we need airlifted bridging. You think he's joking. Then, a few hours later, you hear it. The low thrum of engines overhead. Planes appear, dropping giant metal panels by parachute. They fall gracefully through the snow, landing with dull thuds. The engineers cheer. It's another impossible miracle. Bridges falling from the sky like gifts from God. By dusk, the temporary bridge is in place. The column begins to move again, trucks creaking, tanks rumbling across the panels one by one. Each crossing sounds like thunder. You hold your breath every time, half expecting the steel to buckle. But it holds. The Marines, it turns out, know how to make miracles last. The road curves into a valley that feels like a trap. Narrow, steep, lined with cliffs on both sides. Everyone knows what that means. Ambush country. The sergeant calls for silence. Even the engines seem to grow quieter, as if they sense what's coming. Then the first explosion. A mine detonates under the lead truck, flipping it onto its side. Flames burst through the snow. Instantly, gunfire erupts from the ridges. Chinese machine guns chatter, their muzzle flashes lighting up the slopes like fireflies. Bullets slice through the air, pinging off armor, snapping branches. Men dive for cover behind the trucks, returning fire in frantic bursts. You crawl under a jeep, heart hammering, watching tracer rounds streak past. The snow kicks up in little puffs all around you. A tank turret swings toward the ridge and fires, a thunderclap that rattles your teeth. The shell smashes into the mountainside, showering rock and snow. The ambush falters. The convoy lurches forward again, engines screaming, tires spinning on the ice. For 30 minutes, it's chaos. Then, as quickly as it began, it ends. The gunfire fades. The smoke drifts away. The only sound left is the crackle of burning fuel and the wind whispering through shattered trees. You emerge from cover, shaking, ears ringing. A corporal pats you on the back and says, "Congratulations. You've officially survived your first mountain massacre." You manage a laugh, more out of relief than humor. The medics move through the wreckage, checking for survivors. Some of the wounded groan softly, others are silent. The dead are lined up beside the road, covered with ponchos that freeze stiff within minutes. You stare at them, and for a moment, you can't tell if they're sleeping or statues.
Historians still debate whether the Chinese intended to annihilate the UN column or simply bleed it dry. The terrain made annihilation unlikely. The weather made everything else unbearable. But in the moment, strategy doesn't matter. You just keep moving. That night, you bivouac in a shallow valley, ringed by pine trees heavy with snow. Fires are forbidden. Smoke draws attention. So you huddle in the dark, wrapped in every layer of fabric you own, watching your breath curl into the frozen air. Somewhere out there, the enemy does the same. You picture them, young men, no older than you, crouched on the same frozen earth, waiting for dawn. A lieutenant walks the perimeter, muttering to himself, "We're all just pawns on a chessboard made of ice." It's supposed to sound profound, but his teeth are chattering too hard to sell it. You pull your scarf tighter, lie back against your pack, and look up at the stars. The sky is impossibly clear. For a moment, you forget the pain in your hands, the weight of the rifle, the smell of death still clinging to your clothes. For a moment, you just breathe. Then, the wind changes. At first, it's just a whisper, soft, distant, almost soothing. But then it grows. The trees start to sway. The snow begins to swirl. You sit up, eyes scanning the dark. The sound isn't the wind, it's voices, low, rhythmic, chanting in Chinese. The attack comes out of the forest like a nightmare. Dozens of flares erupt overhead, turning night into blinding white. The Chinese soldiers surge forward through the drifts, firing as they run. You grab your rifle and shoot until your shoulder goes numb. The air fills with the scream of bullets, the thud of grenades, the sharp, metallic scent of gunfire. You can see their faces this time, grim, determined, eyes wide against the light. There's no hatred there, just the same desperate will to survive. One of them gets within a few feet of your position before collapsing, snow spraying around him like feathers. His rifle skids to your boots. You kick it away, reload, fire again. The Marines form a defensive ring, firing outward in every direction. The night becomes a circle of muzzle flashes, each one briefly illuminating the frozen faces of the men beside you. You can't tell where the enemy ends and the snow begins. It's all just movement and noise. After what feels like hours, the bugles sound again. This time retreat. The Chinese fade back into the forest, leaving behind silence and smoke. You're left trembling, adrenaline draining away, every muscle aching. Someone mutters, "If hell freezes over, this is what it looks like." No one disagrees. When dawn finally arrives, it's quiet again. You step out of the trench and look around. The snow is scarred with footprints, shell holes, and bodies half buried by the wind. The sunlight glints off them like glass. A strange thought occurs to you. The snow doesn't care who wins. It covers everyone the same. You stand there for a long time, watching the flakes drift down, erasing the marks of battle one by one. For the first time since the nightmare began, you realize how small you are in this frozen world, and how much it takes for one human being to keep walking through it. By the time the sun claws its way over the mountains again, the column has been marching for 6 straight days. Your boots feel like wooden blocks. Every step grinds the blisters beneath the frostbite until you stop feeling your feet altogether. The road twists down through canyons where the wind screams like artillery. The convoy moves in slow fits. Halt, crawl, halt. A snake of men and metal, too stubborn to die. At dawn, you pass through a narrow gorge called Funchilin Pass. The engineers mutter about demolitions up ahead, about bridges blown by the Chinese to trap you here forever. You glance over the edge and see nothing but the frozen void, the valley floor 1,000 feet below. Trucks hug the inside wall so tightly that their mirrors scrape rock. One careless swerve and you'll be flying. You keep your eyes forward. The man walking beside you, a kid from Wisconsin named Delaney, breaks the silence. "Hey," he says, voice muffled through his scarf. "If I survive this,
I'm gonna move somewhere that doesn't even know what snow is. You grunt. Florida? He shakes his head. Hawaii. I hear they got beaches there. Girls in grass skirts. Nobody freezing off there. He stops, laughs. Yeah, Hawaii. You smile despite yourself. It's absurd, talking about beaches while trudging through an Arctic nightmare. But that absurdity keeps you sane. The weather turns on you before noon. A wall of wind slams down the valley, bringing with it a blizzard so thick you can't see the man ahead. The snow stings your face like sandpaper. The column stops. Orders ripple back. Hold position. Engines off. Wait it out. You drop into the snow and pull your parka tighter. The silence inside the storm is surreal. No engines, no gunfire. Just the steady hiss of falling snow. Men huddle in groups, backs to the wind, sharing body heat. Someone produces a harmonica and plays a few slow notes of Silent Night. The sound is faint, shaky, but beautiful. For a few minutes, it feels like Christmas again. If Christmas had machine guns and frostbite. The calm doesn't last. From somewhere beyond the white curtain comes the stutter of gunfire. The Chinese have found you again. Tracer rounds cut red streaks through the snowstorm. The convoy erupts into motion. Men shouting, engines roaring back to life, rifles cracking at shadows. Visibility's barely 10 feet. You're firing at movement more than targets. The echoes bounce off the cliffs, turning every sound into confusion. Stay tight, the sergeant yells. Don't let the column scatter. You crawl behind a truck, firing toward the muzzle flashes. The snow blinds you. Your rifle jams. You smack the bolt until it snaps free. The air smells of diesel and blood. Someone's yelling for a medic, someone else for more ammo. You can't see faces, only outlines. Then, as quickly as it began, it stops. The wind dies. The gunfire fades. The Chinese have vanished back into the storm, leaving nothing but silence. You stay crouched for a while, listening, half expecting another attack. None comes. The sergeant calls for a head count. A few are missing, lost in the blizzard, or taken by the enemy. Nobody says their names aloud. The march resumes in grim silence. You reach the far end of the pass just as night falls. The engineers are already there, working by lantern light on the new bridge, the one built from those parachuted steel panels. The structure stretches across a chasm that looks bottomless, the wind howling through it like an organ. Each vehicle crosses one at a time, slow and deliberate, the panels groaning under the weight. When your turn comes, you grip the side railing and walk across, trying not to look down. The metal vibrates underfoot. Halfway across, a gust of wind nearly knocks you sideways. You freeze, heart pounding, then take another step, and another. When you reach the far side, you realize your knees are shaking. You've crossed from death into something that almost resembles hope. Past the bridge, the road widens into a valley where the terrain finally flattens. The stars burn cold above you. The men begin to talk again, softly, about food, warmth, home. Someone mentions rumors of ships waiting at Hamhung, the port city to the south. Evacuation. The word feels unreal. Think they'll actually get us out? Delaney asks. They better, you say. I'm not dying for a frozen lake. That night, you camp near Kotori, the last major strong point before the coast. It's little more than a scattering of tents and damaged trucks, but after days of constant movement, it feels like civilization. You can even smell cooked food. Real, hot food. The cooks have somehow managed to heat stew using improvised oil drums. You line up with your mess tin, and when the ladle drops that steaming sludge into it, you could cry from joy. Don't burn your tongue, the cook warns. Happened to the last guy. You grin. At least it means something's warm enough to burn. You eat slowly, savoring each bite. Around you, the men look more human again. Still exhausted, still filthy, but alive. Someone passes around a deck of cards. Someone else tells a joke about MacArthur promising to be home by Christmas. Laughter ripples through the group, thin but genuine. Then the chaplain shows up. His beard's frosted white, his Bible stiff with ice. He doesn't preach, he just says, "You've come farther than anyone thought possible. Keep going." Simple words, but they hit hard. You nod along with the others, staring into your tin of stew like it holds the future. The next morning, as the column prepares to move again, you spot a line of stretchers being loaded into trucks. Frostbitten men, bandaged men, men too weak to stand. You catch sight of Captain Barber being lifted onto one of the vehicles, his leg finally giving out after days of command. He sees you watching and raises a hand. You salute. It's the last time you'll see him. Later you'll learn he received the Medal of Honor for Fox Hill, but right now he just looks like a tired man who's finally allowed to sit down. The road ahead drops sharply toward the sea. Somewhere beyond those ridges lies Hamhung and safety. The convoy begins to move again. Engines growling, treads crunching. The Marines take point, clearing the way for the wounded and supply trucks. You fall in behind them, rifle slung, body running on autopilot. Every few miles, the Chinese test the column. Sniper fire, quick ambushes, mortar shells. Each time, the Marines respond like clockwork. Form a perimeter, return fire, move on. You're past fear now, past exhaustion. There's just momentum. The simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. At a rest stop, you find Delaney sitting on a crate, boots off, staring at his feet. The toes are gray. "Think I waited too long to change socks," he says quietly. You crouch beside him. "Doc'll fix you up." He smiles faintly. "Sure he will." He doesn't sound convinced. You stay with him until the order comes to move again. When you look back, the corpsmen are already wrapping his feet in gauze. You keep walking. By late afternoon, the sea comes into view. It appears suddenly, like a mirage, a vast sheet of steel blue water stretching to the horizon. Ships dot the bay, destroyers, transports, tankers, their decks glinting in the sun. Hamhung. The sight knocks the breath out of you. Men begin cheering, shouting, waving their helmets in the air. Some laugh, some cry. The sound rolls down the line like thunder. But even here, the danger isn't over. The Chinese are closing in behind. Shells burst on the hills to the north, sending fountains of snow skyward. The last of the rearguard fights to keep them at bay, while the main force loads onto trucks bound for the port. The Navy guns from offshore answer the Chinese batteries with deep, rhythmic booms that shake the ground. You climb onto the deck of a transport ship as the sun sets. The air smells of salt for the first time in weeks. The deck is crowded with Marines wrapped in blankets, faces hollow but eyes bright. Someone hands you a cup of hot coffee. You sip it, scald your tongue, and grin anyway. It's the best pain you've ever felt. Below deck, the engines rumble to life. You watch through the rail as the shoreline begins to shrink, the mountains fading into gray. For the first time since November, you feel warmth creeping back into your bones. You made it. Against everything. Against the cold, the enemy, the odds. You're alive. Historians still argue whether Chosin was a defeat or a miracle. You don't care what they call it. All you know is that the sea is blue again, and you can finally breathe without seeing your breath turn to ice. The ship's deck is crowded, noisy, alive. After so many days of silence, the chatter of engines, boots, and voices feels like civilization itself. The sea breeze cuts cold across your face, but it's a living cold. It smells of salt, not blood, and carries no hint of cordite or fear. You lean against the rail, staring at the dark coastline shrinking behind you. Those mountains, those frozen ridges, that glittering white hell, they all seem like something from another life. And yet, you know you'll never escape them. Men line the deck shoulder to shoulder, silent now, each lost in his own thoughts. You see faces you recognize from Fox Hill, gaunt, frostbitten, eyes sunken deep but still burning with the strange light of survival. One Marine mutters, "Never thought I'd see salt water again," and his buddy just nods, clutching a canteen like it's holy. You watch the shoreline fade completely, replaced by open sea. The ship pitches gently, and for the first time in weeks, the ground moves under you in a way that doesn't mean danger. The sound of waves against the hull replaces the bugles and mortars. You close your eyes and let it sink in. You're not surrounded anymore.
you're free.
Or at least, that's what you tell yourself.
Because freedom doesn't erase the memory of what you've seen. The crew passes out blankets and hot rations. Real food this time. Steaming bowls of Navy stew and thick bread. You sit cross-legged on the deck beside a dozen others, hands trembling from both hunger and disbelief. Someone says the cooks boiled water using leftover aviation fuel. You don't care. It's the best meal of your life. A Navy officer steps up on a crate to make an announcement. "Gentlemen," he says, his voice carried by a megaphone, "you are aboard the SS Meredith Victory. We'll be making port at Humnam shortly for full evacuation operations. You've done the impossible, and I mean that literally." There's polite applause, but no cheering. The words impossible and done don't seem to belong in the same sentence out here. Most of you just sit in silence, chewing slowly, eyes fixed on the horizon. Below deck, the air is thick with oil, sweat, and steam. Wounded men lie shoulder to shoulder on makeshift cots, IV lines dangling from the rafters. Corpsmen move quietly between them, checking vitals, changing bandages. You help carry in one of the last stretchers from the dock, a Marine missing both feet, grinning through cracked lips as he says, "Guess I'll finally get that desk job." You laugh because you're supposed to, because what else can you do? When you climb back topside, the sky is streaked with pink and orange. The sun setting over the Sea of Japan looks almost too gentle for this world. The ship's bow cuts through the water like a knife through glass. Behind you, smoke still rises from Hamhung. The last evacuation ships are loading under artillery fire. You can see flashes of distant explosions reflecting off the water like lightning. The Chinese are close. "Think they'll follow us to the sea?" someone asks. You shake your head. They can have what's left. The man beside you, an army sergeant with a bandaged arm, smirks. You know, they'll write this up as a withdrawal. "It was," you say. He looks at you for a long moment, then laughs softly. "Maybe. But hell, I've been in withdrawals before. None this loud." It's gallows humor, but it feels right. Hours pass. The ship reaches Hunnam, the port city turned refugee camp. The harbor is chaos. Smoke, fire, people everywhere. Tens of thousands of civilians swarm the docks, desperate to flee south before the Chinese arrive. You see mothers clutching babies, old men pulling carts, children wrapped in rags. The line between soldier and refugee dissolves in the snow. The Meredith Victory begins taking on civilians as well. You help load them aboard, one after another, families packed so tightly they can barely move. By the time the ship's captain calls a halt, there are over 14,000 people aboard, the largest evacuation by a single vessel in history. You don't know that number yet, of course. You just know that the deck has become a sea of faces, wide-eyed and silent. There's a boy, maybe 12, shivering in a too large coat. You hand him your extra gloves. He bows, mutters something you can't understand, and presses his hands together in thanks. That small gesture cuts deeper than any metal could. Historians will later call it the Christmas miracle of Hunnam. At the time, it doesn't feel like a miracle, just another frozen night under the threat of artillery. But when the ship finally pulls away from the dock, the sight is unforgettable. Behind you, the port explodes. The last US engineers detonate hundreds of tons of ammunition and fuel to deny them to the Chinese. The night sky turns white, then orange, then blood red. You feel the shock wave rumble through the hull. The mountains beyond Hamhung are silhouetted in flame. It's beautiful in a terrible way, the kind of beauty that makes your stomach twist. Someone whispers, "So that's it. North Korea's gone." You keep watching as the coast fades into smoke and shadow. You realize this isn't just the end of a battle, it's the end of a dream. The dream of uniting Korea, of ending the war before Christmas, of victory without cost. That dream died, somewhere back on those frozen ridges, buried under a foot of snow. A voice on the intercom breaks the silence. "All personnel secure. We're en route to Busan. Estimated arrival 48 hours. 48 hours. 2 days between hell and whatever comes next. You lie down on the deck beside the rail, using your pack as a pillow. The stars overhead are painfully bright. You can hear the hum of the engines, steady and deep. Around you, the men drift into uneasy sleep. Some mumble names, some twitch. One cries softly, trying to hide it. You understand completely. You can't sleep. Every time you close your eyes, you see flashes, bugles echoing through the dark, snow glowing under flares, faces turned upward in the white light. You turn onto your side, pressing your palms against your eyes until colors bloom behind them. It doesn't help. Eventually, you get up and walk toward the stern. The sea glimmers under the moon, endless and indifferent. You find yourself wondering if the Chinese soldiers you fought made it through the storm. If they're out there somewhere, huddled in the same freezing wind. War feels so pointless when you realize everyone suffers the same cold. A chaplain steps up beside you, his collar stiff with frost. "Can't sleep?" he asks. You shake your head. He looks out at the horizon. "They'll call this battle a tragedy," he says quietly. "They'll call it a miracle, too. Both are true." You don't answer. You just stare at the dark line where sea meets sky. The word miracle doesn't sit right in your chest, not after what you've seen. Still, when the dawn finally breaks, pale gold spilling across the water, you feel something close to peace. The sea is calm. The air, though cold, smells clean. The sound of waves replaces the memory of bugles. You realize you've made it through something that should have killed you 10 times over. When Busan's coastline appears 2 days later, green and alive, the men cheer. Some kneel and kiss the deck. Others just stare in silence, too tired to celebrate. You feel both things at once, the relief of survival and the weight of everything left behind. You whisper, "Goodbye, Chosin," though the word catches in your throat, because you know the reservoir won't really let you go, not ever. When the ship finally docks at Busan, the gangway drops with a hollow clang, and the men step out onto solid ground like astronauts returning from another planet. The port smells of diesel, seaweed, and life. Warm life. You inhale it greedily. The ground beneath your boots doesn't shift, doesn't creak, doesn't echo with artillery in the distance. For the first time in weeks, you're not marching toward or away from death. You're just standing still. The dock teems with movement. Nurses, officers, and South Korean civilians rush to meet the survivors. Stretchers line the wharf. Trucks idle, ready to take the wounded to hospitals. You see Red Cross workers passing out coffee, blankets, cigarettes. One hands you a cup of something steaming and sweet. The first sip burns your tongue. You don't care. It's heat. It's proof you're still alive. A reporter shouts questions, camera flashing like gunfire. "How bad was it?" he asks one Marine. The man just looks at him, hollow-eyed, and walks away. There aren't words big enough for what happened up there. They move you to a field camp outside the city. Rows of canvas tents pitched in muddy ground. The contrast is dizzying. Puddles instead of ice, wet earth instead of frozen rock. The air smells of thawed decay and diesel fuel, but it's paradise compared to Chosin. You strip off your frozen layers and finally see the damage. Skin cracked and purple, toenails gone, fingers blackened at the tips. The medics shake their heads and say, "Could have been worse." You almost laugh. They feed you broth, issue new uniforms, and tell you to rest. You lie on a cot listening to the rhythmic hammering of rain on canvas. It's a soft, forgiving sound, nothing like the whistle of incoming mortars. You let it lull you towards sleep, only to jolt awake an hour later, heart pounding. Sure, you've heard bugles, but it's just the wind snapping at the tent flaps. The days that follow blur together. You eat. You sleep. You thaw. Slowly, the feeling comes back to your fingers and toes, along with a deep ache that never quite goes away. Some of the men are shipped home immediately. Frostbite, shrapnel, nerves gone bad. Others, the ones like you, half frozen but still mobile,
stay behind to regroup. The war isn't over, after all. The front line has simply shifted. One afternoon, you're called to a debriefing. A group of officers sits behind folding tables, notebooks open, eyes sharp. They ask about enemy strength, tactics, morale. You answer automatically, voice flat. They came in waves, no fear of dying. Use the terrain like it was home. They nod, write notes. One of them asks if you think the Chinese will stop at the 38th parallel. You shrug. They didn't stop at Chosin. Historians will later dissect that question for decades. Why didn't we see it coming? You could tell them the truth. Everyone saw it. They just didn't believe it. That night, you wander outside camp, drawn by the sound of music. A field radio crackles faintly, broadcasting from Tokyo. Bing Crosby again, singing, "I'll be home for Christmas." The irony isn't lost on anyone. Around the radio, a few Marines sit smoking in silence, faces lit by the soft orange glow. You join them, not speaking. The song ends, replaced by static, then another, White Christmas. Someone snorts. "Too soon," he says, and everyone laughs. Brittle, tired laughter that dies quickly. You can't help thinking of the men who didn't make it out. Fox Hill, Udam Ni, Hagaruri. You remember their faces when the flares lit up the night, their breath crystallizing mid-shout. You wonder if they'd laugh at this song too, or if they'd just stare at the snow and shake their heads. After a week, orders come down. Prepare for redeployment. The 1st Marine Division will regroup and re-enter combat farther south. The war, it seems, is only beginning again. You pack your gear slowly, trying not to think about the irony. You survived the impossible, only to be told to go back. At the docks, a Navy chaplain gives a short speech. "You are not defeated," he says. "You fought your way out. You brought your wounded home. You turned retreat into redemption." The words hang in the damp air. Some men nod, some look away. You think of Captain Barber again, his limp, his quiet confidence, and figure he'd have liked that phrasing. As you board the transport trucks headed inland, you pass rows of refugees still arriving from the north. Families huddled under blankets, faces hollow with cold and hunger. A little girl waves at the convoy. You wave back automatically, forcing a smile. She beams, a tiny light in all that gray. The road south winds through villages flattened by shell fire. Charred beams stick out of the snow like broken ribs. You see farmers digging trenches, soldiers hauling artillery, priests leading prayers in burned-out churches. It's a country stitched together by resilience, the kind that doesn't make headlines, but keeps people alive anyway. Your convoy stops near Masan for the night. The camp there feels almost civilized. Tents with stoves, cots with blankets, coffee that's actually hot. You sit with a few others, swapping stories not of heroism, but absurdity. A guy whose boots froze solid around his feet. Another who swore he saw a frozen Chinese soldier still standing upright days after he died. You laugh harder than you should. It's a relief valve, the kind that keeps sanity intact. Later, lying in your sleeping bag, you think about the labels people will attach to Chosin. Defeat, miracle, turning point. None of them feel right. What you remember most vividly isn't the tactics or even the terror. It's the sound, the endless wind, the bugles, the crunch of boots on ice, the stillness after each attack when the snow fell and covered everything, the living and the dead, with equal grace. You fall asleep to that memory and dream you're back there, trudging through the white abyss. Only this time, the bugles are softer and the snow is warm. The next morning, a mail truck arrives. You get a letter from home, your first since October. The envelope's smudged and torn, but the handwriting's familiar. Your sister writes about ration coupons, the neighbor's new puppy, the local paper carrying headlines about victory at Chosin. You laugh out loud at that one. Victory, sure. You fold the letter carefully and tuck it into your pocket, a reminder that the world still exists beyond frost and fire. By midday, you're back on the move. The trucks rumble through muddy hills, passing convoys headed north. Reinforcements, replacements, the next wave in an endless tide. You see their faces, young and eager, some smiling, some solemn. You want to shout to them, "It's colder than you think up there," but you don't. They'll find out soon enough. That night, the company bivouacs near a quiet river. You sit alone at the water's edge, staring at the reflection of the moon. It ripples and breaks every time the wind shifts. You realize that, like that reflection, the men who fought at Chosin have been changed, fractured but still visible, shimmering just below the surface of history. Historians will write their books. Generals will deliver speeches. But the truth will always live here, in the quiet between breaths, in the frozen silence of memory. You know that when you're old, people will ask what it was like, and you'll have to choose between telling them what happened and telling them what it felt like. The first is easy. The second is impossible. A frog croaks somewhere in the reeds, a sound so ordinary it startles you. You hadn't heard anything that alive in weeks. You smile and whisper to yourself, "Not dead yet." You'll carry the reservoir with you for the rest of your life, in your bones, your scars, your dreams. The cold will linger, even on summer nights. But so will the fire that kept you walking, the stubborn defiance that refused to let go. You stand, stretch, and head back toward camp, the sound of the river fading behind you. Tomorrow, the war resumes. But tonight, for once, the only battle is between sleep and memory. You wake before dawn, as you always do now. No bugle calls, no shouted orders, just habit. The body remembers what the mind would rather forget. The air outside the tent is damp instead of freezing, yet you still see your breath out of reflex and half expect to hear mortars in the distance. What you hear instead is rain, soft, almost apologetic, as if the sky itself is tired of violence. The camp smells of wet canvas, machine oil, and coffee. Marines shuffle around fires in ponchos, boots sinking into the mud. It's strange how quickly war changes its face. One week you're fighting in an Arctic wasteland, the next you're standing ankle-deep in Korean spring. But the exhaustion clings like frostbite you can't thaw out. The colonel comes through, reading orders from a clipboard. The division will reconstitute near Masan and prepare defensive lines along the south. He sounds rehearsed, like he's giving a lecture, rather than moving what's left of 10,000 men. You catch fragments, rotation schedule, replacement draft, equipment losses. No one asks questions. They just nod and go back to tightening straps, cleaning rifles, pretending normal has returned. You sip a tin of coffee gone cold and think about the words reconstitute and replacement. They sound scientific, bloodless, but you know what they really mean. Patching the holes where friends used to be. A sergeant hands you a new pair of gloves. Fresh issue. Try not to freeze these. You grin. "I'll do my best, Sarge. Maybe I'll just stay south this time." He laughs, but there's no humor in it. "Kid, the war's got long legs. It'll find you." He's right. By mid-morning, trucks start lining up. The division is pulling back to rearm, but the fighting hasn't stopped, just moved. Columns of smoke rise in the distance, thick and lazy. The Chinese and North Koreans have pushed farther south than anyone thought possible. Seoul is in chaos again. You feel that creeping sense of déjà vu, the pendulum of war swinging back the other way. But for now, your world is smaller. It's the sound of boots in mud, the smell of diesel, the hiss of rain on tin helmets. You board a truck with half a dozen others. The canvas flaps close behind you, shutting out the gray world. Inside, someone scribbled words on the wall in chalk. Fox Company, still here. You run your fingers over the letters and feel something tighten in your chest. The road south is rough. The trucks jolt over potholes, the suspension squealing like an old ship. Every few miles, the convoy slows to pass refugees trudging along the ditches. Families carrying bundles, ox carts piled with children, the old and the broken trying to outrun the next front line. You toss a few rations to them as you pass. They nod, bow, keep walking. The look in their eyes is one you recognize too well.
that hollow endurance of people who have run out of tears. Historians still debate whether the evacuation from the north was the greatest logistical achievement or a moral tragedy. Maybe it was both. But for the people trudging through that mud, it wasn't history, it was survival. That night, your unit bivouacs near a railroad spur. Someone finds an old gramophone in a wrecked building, still half working, and soon the scratchy sound of jazz floats through the drizzle. The tune is Ain't Misbehavin', upbeat and absurdly cheerful. You lie on your back, listening, smiling at how the world refuses to stay solemn. Delaney's there too, hobbling now with both feet bandaged. "Heard rumor we're going home," he says. You raise an eyebrow. "You believe that?" He shrugs. "If I say it out loud enough, maybe it'll happen." He's got that grin again, the one that mocks fate. You hope it stays. The next morning, new orders arrive. Rotation for some, redeployment for others. You're among those slated to stay. Experienced personnel, the sheet says. You stare at it for a long moment, wondering when you became experienced. Later that day, you find yourself assigned to escort duty, transporting wounded from the makeshift hospital to a ship in Pusan Harbor. The road back feels strange, familiar, like reading a letter you once wrote to yourself. The city is louder now. Crowds, vendors, military police shouting through the din. Life has rushed back in to fill the vacuum left by battle. At the dock, stretchers move in steady lines. You carry one end of a litter, the man on it pale but conscious. "Where to?" he asks. "Hospital ship. You'll be warm in an hour." "Warm," he repeats, as if testing the word. "Haven't been that in months." You smile and say, "Welcome back to Earth." Once the wounded are loaded, you stand at the rail and watch the harbor lights flicker on. The ships gleam in the dusk, and for a heartbeat, you think of the night Fox Hill was lit by flares instead of lanterns. The glow is softer now, merciful. A Navy nurse appears beside you, offering a cigarette. "You were up there?" she asks. You nod. "My brother too," she says quietly. "He didn't make it." You start to say something, then stop. There's nothing that fits. She looks out over the water, exhales smoke, and says, "They keep saying it was worth it. I hope they're right." You want to tell her it was worth it because we're still here, but the words won't come because you're not sure that's true. When you return to camp, the rain has stopped. A double rainbow arcs over the horizon, ridiculous and perfect. The men whistle and point, laughing like schoolboys. It's such a normal sound that it feels foreign. You watch the colors fade into the gray sky and think maybe nature's got its own sense of humor. That evening, a letter arrives from Division HQ. It's brief, bureaucratic, almost absurdly calm. Fox Company, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, is hereby commended for extraordinary heroism in defense of Tokdong Pass. It lists statistics, names, medals recommended. You stare at the sheet until the words blur. Heroism. That's another one of those words like victory. Clean, neat, unbloodied. You fold the paper and tuck it into your jacket, right next to your sister's letter from home. Two worlds pressed together, one written in ink, the other in frost and fire. That night, as you lie awake under a sky full of unfamiliar stars, you realize that something in you has shifted. The fear is gone, but so is the certainty that used to replace it. You've learned that survival isn't a reward, it's a responsibility. You made it out, so you owe the ones who didn't. You close your eyes and picture the ridge again. Fox Hill, silent now under the snow. You imagine the wind still sweeping over those foxholes, whispering through the pines. Somewhere up there, beneath the drifts, the bugles are quiet. The war moves on, but that hill will always stay frozen in time. You whisper a small promise into the dark. I'll remember. Historians will argue forever about Chosin, its tactics, its meaning, its cost. They'll tally divisions and tonnage, calculate kill ratios, debate whether it changed the war. But they'll never capture the cold that burned your lungs, the sound of boots breaking ice, the way courage looked at 40 below zero. They'll never quite understand how men laughed while freezing to death,
or how snow could be both grave and shield. You roll onto your side and let the memory wash over you, not as tragedy or triumph, but as truth. You survived, yes, but part of you stayed up there on that ridge, carved into the ice with every friend you lost. Tomorrow you'll march again. Maybe north, maybe south, maybe into another valley no one's ever heard of. But tonight, you're still on Fox Hill, surrounded by ghosts who refuse to fade. And somehow, that feels right. The next few weeks pass in a haze of gray skies and gray thoughts. You move south with the rest of the division, setting up defensive positions that everyone pretends are temporary. We'll counterattack soon, the officers say, but no one bothers to ask when. The frost on your boots is replaced by mud, the snow by drizzle, but the cold never really leaves. It's just hiding under your skin now, waiting for nightfall to creep back in. You pull guard duty along a ridgeline, overlooking rice paddies that look like shattered mirrors. The fields are empty this time of year, nothing but flooded ghosts of villages that used to be. Every once in a while you hear the distant thump of artillery and feel the old tension coil up in your chest. It's strange how your body reacts before your mind does, like it's already halfway back to Tok Tong Pass. When you wake in the mornings, you can't feel your fingertips. You check them, almost disappointed to find they're still there. You remember the corpsman's words back at Pusan, "You'll keep most of them." You never asked what most meant. The new replacements arrive a few days later. Fresh faces, clean uniforms, wide eyes. They still salute too crisply and talk about home like it's a promise. You watch them unpack their gear, shaking your head at the confidence of the unscarred. One of them, a kid no older than 19, sees your unit patch and lights up. "You were at Chosin, right? They said it was legendary." You pause, mid-drag on a cigarette. "Yeah," you say finally. "Legendary." He grins. "Must have been something." You blow out smoke and stare at the horizon. "Yeah, it was something." He doesn't ask again. You can't blame him. Some stories don't want to be told out loud. Later, as dusk settles, you find yourself sitting alone on a supply crate near the edge of camp. The rain's coming down soft and steady, tapping on your helmet like fingers. It's peaceful in a way, but also too quiet. You reach into your pocket and pull out that crumpled letter from Division HQ, the commendation for Fox Company. The words are still the same, printed in tidy ink. Extraordinary heroism under extreme conditions. You fold it once, twice, then slip it back into your jacket. You can't bring yourself to throw it away, but you can't look at it for long either. Delaney finds you there, hobbling on his half-healed feet, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "You know," he says, "I thought when we got out it'd start feeling like a victory." You nod. "Hasn't, has it?" He laughs dry and short. "Not even close." He sits beside you, staring into the rain. For a long time, neither of you says anything. Then he adds, "Heard they're calling us the Frozen Chosin. Sounds like a bad jazz band." You chuckle in spite of yourself. "Yeah, but we had better lighting." "Flares and tracers, baby," he says, miming a trumpet. For the first time in days, you both laugh. Real laughter, the kind that stings the eyes. Then the laughter dies, and you sit in silence again, the rain filling the space where words don't fit. Historians still argue whether humor saved morale or simply delayed the breakdown. Maybe both. But you've learned something they'll never quantify in reports. Jokes are a form of armor. They keep the cracks from spreading. That night, the rain turns to fog. The camp vanishes into mist, lights glowing like distant stars. You wander to the perimeter, rifle slung, boots squelching in the mud. The fog makes every sound strange, muffled, uncertain. A twig snaps, and your heart leaps to your throat before your brain reminds you it's just a dog. The animal trots past, ribs showing, tail low. You reach into your pocket, toss it a bit of biscuit. It sniffs, hesitates, then eats. "Guess we both made it out," you whisper. You stand there for a while, staring into the fog, listening to the faint hum of generators and the murmur of distant waves. It almost feels like peace, or maybe the closest thing to it you'll ever get. The next morning, orders come down again. Patrol duty. You and a small squad are sent to scout the hills north of the line. The landscape is unrecognizable, not frozen anymore, just scarred. Charred trees jut from the earth like blackened fingers. The air smells of mud and smoke. You move slowly, eyes scanning for movement, ears tuned for anything that doesn't belong. Halfway up a ridge, you find what used to be a village. The roofs are gone, walls caved in, but one small shrine still stands, half buried in debris. Inside, a single clay figure remains intact, staring serenely through a crack in the wall. You pause, brush off the ash. Tougher than it looks, you mutter. Delaney grins. Maybe we should recruit him. You both laugh, then keep moving. At the top of the ridge you see it, the valley spreading out below, lush and green now that spring's creeping in. It's hard to believe this land was a battlefield just months ago. You can still trace the old trench lines, faint scars cutting through the hills. The wind blows softly, carrying the scent of pine. For a moment, it's almost beautiful. Delaney squints. Crazy how fast it heals. You nod. The land, yeah. The people, maybe not so much. He's quiet after that. When you return to camp, you find a small crowd gathered around a radio. The announcer's voice crackles through the static. Ceasefire talks proposed in Panmunjom. The words ripple through the group like electricity. Hope and disbelief share the same expression. Some cheer softly, others just stare at the ground. You've heard this kind of thing before. Hope, like weather, changes fast in Korea. That night, you can't sleep. The thought of peace, real or rumored, feels both distant and dangerous. You lie on your cot staring at the tent's ceiling, thinking about what you'll do if it actually happens. Go home, maybe, or maybe not. You're not sure what home even means anymore. The sound of rain starts again, gentle, rhythmic. You close your eyes and imagine it's snow, soft flakes falling over the reservoir, covering the scars. You picture Fox Hill as it must look now, quiet, untouched. The foxholes filled in by time. The Chinese bugles long silent. The wind sweeping clean over everything. You wonder if someday tourists will come there. Maybe school kids, historians, the curious few who want to see where legends were made. You hope they feel the cold, just a little, not enough to hurt, just enough to understand. Historians will keep arguing. Was it a victory, a disaster, a turning point? You've stopped caring about those questions. What matters isn't how they define it, it's how you remember it. Not the numbers or the maps, but the sound of snow under boots, the flicker of flares on the ridge, the laughter in the dark between attacks. You turn over on your cot, pulling the blanket tighter. The rain fades into steady breathing all around you. For the first time in months, you feel something close to warmth, not just from the blanket, but from the thought that maybe, somehow, you've already done enough. Tomorrow will bring new orders, new battles, new names for old nightmares. But tonight, it's just you and the sound of the rain, soft, insistent, and alive. You whisper to the darkness, "We made it through," and for once, that feels like victory enough. You don't expect the letter that arrives a month later. It's official, cream paper, embossed seal, folded in triplicate. You open it while sitting on a wooden crate outside the mess tent. Inside, a citation for Captain William E. Barber, postscript noting that his company, your company, exhibited extraordinary heroism against overwhelming odds at Toktong Pass, the Medal of Honor. You trace the typed name with a thumb gone stiff from the cold that never truly left. The words are formal, clean, bloodless. You can almost hear Barber's dry chuckle. About time someone noticed. You hand the paper to Delaney. He whistles softly. Not bad for a bunch of frozen screw-ups. Yeah, you murmur. He earned every letter of it. That evening, the company holds a small ceremony. No brass band, just a chaplain, a flag, and coffee heated in tin cups. Someone reads Barber's citation aloud. The men stand straighter as the words roll through the damp air, remembering his limp, his calm voice on those nights when you thought the world would end. When the chaplain finishes, nobody claps. They just nod, quietly, the way men do when there's nothing left to prove. Afterward, you walk down to the shoreline. The tide slides in and out with a patient hiss. The sea looks different from this side, gentle now, not the frantic gray that swallowed the coast of Hong Kong. The moonlight glints off the water like ice. You crouch, scoop up a handful of wet sand, and let it drain through your fingers. Warm, gritty, alive. You whisper, "We made it, Cap," and let the sea take the words. The next weeks are filled with rebuilding, new recruits, new weapons, new plans that sound suspiciously like old ones. You spend your days training men half your age to survive winters they'll hopefully never see. They listen to you with the wide eyes of people who still believe experience equals invincibility. You teach them how to wrap feet in dry socks, how to clear a rifle with frozen hands, how to recognize the dull ache that means frostbite is coming. You never mention the nightmares or the way snow sometimes looks red in your sleep. At night, you sit in the canteen and write letters you never send. To your parents, to Barber, to the ones who didn't make it. You tell them the things you couldn't say when it mattered. How the silence between bugle calls was worse than the attacks. How the cold felt alive. How laughter was the last defense. The ink blots, the paper smudges, and you fold the pages into your pocket. Maybe someday you'll burn them. For now, you just carry them. Spring crawls north. The mountains bloom again. Pink azaleas where the trenches used to be. Grass creeping over shell craters. The land forgets faster than people do. On patrol one morning, you pass an old battlefield and see children playing among the wrecks, their laughter echoing off rusted tank hulls. One waves, you wave back, heart twisting. They're too young to know what happened here, and maybe that's mercy. Delaney's transfer comes through at last. He limps into your tent, waving the papers. "Stateside, baby. Doctor says I'm due for a thaw." He grins, but his eyes are damp. You shake his hand. "Go melt somewhere sunny." He salutes with mock formality. "I'll drink something with ice in it just to spite Korea." When he leaves, the tent feels emptier than it should. Weeks later, you receive a new assignment. Liaison duty near Seoul. The city is half rubble, half miracle, its streets alive with markets and music. At night, neon signs flicker where artillery once fell. You walk through the crowds, feeling both invisible and out of place. A ghost wandering among the living. One evening, you find a tailor's shop that somehow survived the war. Inside, an old man stitches quietly while a radio hums a soft melody. You browse aimlessly until something catches your eye. A bolt of pale blue fabric, the color of morning sky over Chosin before the storms came. You buy a yard of it, no idea why, just knowing you need to. Later, you cut a small square, fold it carefully, and tuck it into your wallet beside Barber's commendation, a piece of peace carried close. Historians will later describe the Battle of Chosin as a masterpiece of logistics, a retreat that became a victory, proof of marine endurance. They'll write about troop movements, casualty ratios, and frozen terrain. You wonder if any of them will mention the color of the sky, or the sound of a match refusing to light at 40 below, or the absurd comfort of a half-frozen chocolate bar shared in silence. Sometimes reporters visit the base, asking veterans to recount their chosen story. You give them the same simple line every time. "We came out carrying our dead and our wounded, and we didn't leave anyone behind." It's true, and it's all they really need to know. But at night, when the camp quiets and the stars creep out, you remember the details. The way the wind screamed through the valleys, the bugles echoing from unseen hills, the glint of ice on rifle barrels. You can still feel the shape of that ridge beneath your boots. Hear Barber's voice through the static. Hold the pass. No one breaks through. One rainy evening, you're invited to speak to a group of new recruits. You don't want to, but you go. They crowd into the mess hall, faces bright, notebooks ready. You look at them and realize you're seeing yourselves before Chosin. Unscarred, certain, young. You clear your throat. You'll hear a lot of stories about that fight, you begin. They'll talk about bravery and tactics. But what kept us alive wasn't medals or orders. It was each other. When everything froze and broke, when the bugles came at midnight, the only thing that mattered was the man next to you. The room is silent. Rain taps the roof like slow applause. Remember that, you finish quietly, and keep your socks dry. They laugh, not knowing that's half a prayer. When the meeting ends, one kid stays behind. Sir, he says, do you ever stop being cold?
You think about it. Not really, you admit, but you learn to live with it. And sometimes, you even miss it.
He looks confused, thanks you, and leaves. You stand there a long time, listening to the rain. That night, you dream again of the ridge, the sky pale, the air sharp, the snow untouched. But this time, it's different. There's no gunfire, no fear, just silence, clean and deep. The men are there, scattered along the trench line, smiling, whole. Barber standing by the radio, hands clasped behind his back. When he sees you, he nods once. Then the wind picks up, carrying his words faint and clear. You did your part. Go home. You wake before dawn, heart steady, breath calm. The rain has stopped, and the horizon glows faintly gold. You step outside and watch the sun rise over the hills, the light warm on your face. For the first time, the warmth doesn't hurt. Weeks turn into months. The war drags on, then slows, then flares again. A weary cycle of noise and waiting. You've stopped keeping track of dates. Seasons are the only calendar you trust now. Spring mud, summer dust, autumn smoke, and that inevitable winter wind curling down from the north like an old enemy returning for one more round. You're stationed now in Seoul proper, attached to a training unit. The city hums with rebuilding, hammer blows, engines, laughter. It's a strange contrast, a place full of life but built over bones. Every street corner holds a story, every cracked wall a reminder that peace here is something fragile, borrowed, temporary. Each morning, you march new recruits through drills, shouting until your voice goes hoarse. They complain about the cold, the rations, the endless repetition. You almost envy them. They don't know how generous the world still is when all you have to fear is boredom. At night, you sit in the corner of the mess hall, writing in a small notebook you bought from a street vendor. Notes, sketches, scraps of memory. Maybe one day it'll become a book. Or maybe it's just your way of keeping ghosts busy. One evening, you're invited to a dinner hosted by a South Korean officer who fought alongside the Marines at Haguru-ri. His name is Major Kim. He's thin, soft-spoken, with a scar running from jaw to ear. His English is better than your Korean, but both of you prefer gestures to grammar. The meal is simple: rice, soup, a bottle of rice wine shared in small cups. He raises his glass and says, "To cold brothers." You clink cups. The warmth burns all the way down. After the third round, he tells you that when his men found the ridge at Tuktong Pass months later, they discovered the foxholes still perfectly intact, rifles frozen where they'd been dropped, helmets filled with snow. Still guarding, he says quietly, even after. You don't know how to answer, so you just nod. That night, when you return to your barracks, you lie awake, imagining those empty holes on that mountain, watching over a valley that no longer needs defending. Historians will call Chosin the battle that saved the 1st Marine Division. But in quiet moments like this, you start to believe it also defined it, stripped everything down to bone and resolve. No politics, no grand strategy. Just men versus mountains versus time. You find yourself talking about it less. People ask, of course. They want stories, numbers, something they can fold neatly into documentaries and textbooks. But every time you start to speak, the words feel wrong, too small, too neat. So you tell simpler truths. You talk about coffee freezing before it hits your lips, about the sound a Jeep makes when its engine dies mid-blizzard, about the way frost turns blood to glass. Those details people can understand. The rest The rest belongs to the mountains. On rare days off, you walk the markets of Seoul. Children run between the stalls, shouting, laughing. You buy trinkets, a carved wooden fox, a piece of silk embroidered with cranes. You tell yourself they're souvenirs. You know they're talismans. One afternoon, while wandering through the city's outskirts, you come across a small memorial being built by Korean laborers. A single stone pillar surrounded by newly planted pines. The inscription at the base is simple: "To the brave who endured the winter." No flags, no names, just that. You stand there for a long time, reading it again and again. It's the most honest epitaph you've ever seen. That night, back in camp, you take out your notebook and write one sentence across a fresh page. Courage is not heat, but the refusal to go cold. You underline it twice. Maybe that's the book's first line. Maybe it's the only line that matters. A few weeks later, a letter from home arrives. Your sister again. She writes that the town held a parade for the local veterans, that people threw confetti, that they even mentioned the heroes of Korea on the radio. You can almost see her trying to make you proud of it. But what catches you most is one line near the end. "It snowed here yesterday. I thought of you." You fold the letter slowly, smiling. Snow doesn't mean the same thing to you anymore, but maybe it still means home to someone else. The winter of 1951 approaches. The unit prepares to rotate positions north again, though north now means something less apocalyptic than it once did. You oversee new recruits packing supplies, checking weapons, counting rations. You're slower these days, not old, but carrying an invisible weight. Sometimes your hands shake when the wind cuts through camp, a leftover echo of frostbite or memory. You're not sure which. That night, you sit by a stove that hisses like a gentle animal. The warmth soaks into your bones, foreign and almost too soft. Across the tent, a young Marine writes a letter by flashlight. You watch him pause, think, smile faintly as he scribbles again. You remember doing that once, believing words could bridge the distance between worlds. He looks up and asks, "Hey Sarge, what's Chosin really like?" You think about how to answer. You want to say it's where fire met ice, where courage stopped being a slogan, where men learned what endurance really means. But you just shrug and say, "Cold, real cold." He laughs, shakes his head, and goes back to writing. That's fine. Let him keep his version. The truth will find him soon enough. A few days later, a transport convoy rolls through camp, trucks heading north toward Hagaru-ri. You watch them go, engines rumbling, soldiers waving from the back. Part of you wants to warn them, to shout, "Respect the mountains," but you don't. They'll learn in their own way, as every generation does. After the convoy fades, you take a walk to the edge of camp. The wind carries the smell of snow, though the ground is still bare. You look up at the stars, sharp and unblinking. Somewhere far beyond those peaks, Fox Hill sleeps under a blanket of white. You can almost hear the bugles again, distant but softened, like a memory finally losing its teeth. Historians will continue to write their books, politicians their speeches, filmmakers their dramatizations. They'll call it Frozen Chosin, the Korean Dunkirk, the miracle withdrawal. You've read some of them already, and they're not wrong. They're just incomplete. None of them mention the quiet afterward, the sound of snowflakes landing on helmets, or the way a man learns to whisper so the cold won't steal his breath. You think of Delaney, maybe back home in Wisconsin now, cursing at ice on his porch. You think of Barber, recovering in a hospital somewhere, his Medal of Honor shining like a small piece of the moon. You think of all the others who stayed behind, and you realize they're not gone. Not really. They're scattered like frost across the world, invisible but everywhere. You close your eyes and feel the chill of that mountain wind one last time. It doesn't sting now. It just reminds you that you lived. Tomorrow, you'll train more recruits. You'll shout the same orders, make the same jokes, drink the same bitter coffee. But tonight, As the first snow of the new winter drifts down outside your tent, you let it fall onto your open palm and melt there. Warm, fleeting, real. You whisper to the darkness, still holding the pass. And somehow, it feels true. Years turn, metals tarnish, orders yellow at the edges, and you find yourself one winter standing by a sheet of ice that looks, in the failing light, exactly like the one you left behind. The map says this lake has a different name and sits far from the 38th parallel, but the wind refuses to read maps. It rushes across the surface, drags at your coat, and plays the old music again. Thin, high bugles that are really just air slipping through frozen grass, but your bones insist otherwise. You close your eyes and the ridge rises in front of you as if it never sank beneath snow. You're not 19 anymore. Your hands don't shake from cold so much as from time. Yet, the first breath you take here fogs with the same stubborn drama, and you catch yourself counting rounds, men, heartbeats, like you always did when nights stretched too long. A small plaque at your feet, set by a veterans chapter, reads simply, "To the chosen few." You smile at the accuracy and at the gall of it. Few then, fewer now, but loud enough to be remembered. A young couple wanders up the path, their child bundled into a bright red parka, cheeks round as apples. The kid stares at your ribbon bar the way children stare at fireworks. "Were you there?" the mother asks, careful with the tense. You nod. A long time ago. She thanks you with the sincerity of people who learned about this on a page, and you say the only thing you can. "We looked out for each other." That's not modesty, it's the geometry of the truth. Wind nudges the snow at your boots. You think of Captain Barber, of the limp he refused to honor, of the voice he refused to raise. Later, when the letter arrived confirming what everyone already knew, that he'd be given a blue ribbon on a star bright enough to make newspapers, you didn't think of parades. You thought of the way he moved along the trench line, a quiet line against panic. That's the version of heroism the cold believes in. You reach into your wallet and find the square of pale blue cloth you bought in Seoul, the color of the sky you remember from mornings before the bugles. You lay it on the snow for a moment, then return it to its place, a private truce between past and pocket. A mainstream fact rises like breath. After the fighting, the Humnam evacuation lifted over 100,000 troops and nearly that many civilians by sea in December 1950, including the astonishing 14,000 refugees crammed aboard the Meredith Victory, which delivered everyone alive. You learned that number years later. You felt its truth the night the harbor became sunrise. A gull skims the ice, its shadow briefly bayonet long. You chuckle, because memory will always add a little theater. "Remember when we said penguins would have done better than tanks?" you murmur, and the wind answers like an inside joke. Then another, softer grin. The way those airdropped candy bars, the Tootsie Rolls the quartermaster miscoded as Tootsie Roll mortar shells, turned out to be putty for bullet-poked fuel lines. Quirky, ridiculous, life-saving. War is nothing if not a magician with pocket lint. You sit on a low stone and let the mind wander the old route. Udam Ni to Hagaru-ri, Hagaru-ri to Koto-ri, Funchilin Pass and the bridge that fell from the sky. Historians still argue whether the Chinese 9th Army Group aimed to annihilate the division or merely to slam the door on the UN's march to the Yalu. They still argue whether temperatures were only -20 or a wind-chilled cruelty beyond charts. They still argue whether the word victory belongs to a column moving south through fire. You've read the footnotes and underlined the maybes. The debate keeps scholars warm. You are content with the simpler arithmetic of breath in, breath out. A boy on skates ventures onto the first yard of ice, and his father calls him back. Not safe yet. You hear that and think, we learned the same lesson with lakes and with plans. Home by Christmas was a headline, not a forecast. If there's comedy left in the story, it's gentle. You, who once swore you'd never complain about summer again, indeed spent Augusts thereafter declaring every heat wave a personal miracle. You, who teased a frozen snowman into being and named it MacArthur's ghost, later told your grandkids the ghost got honorably discharged once we reached Ham Hung. You, who taped socks, thawed bolts, and made coffee that tasted like engine oil, now send back hotel cappuccinos for lacking field authenticity. The waitress laughs. You tip large.
You walk the shoreline until your knees suggest a truce, then lean against a birch and listen. There is a specific quiet that follows battle, a cottoning of the world that arrives when guns and grief both run out of voice. You first heard it in the pauses between attacks on Fox Hill, when flakes settled on helmets and everyone, friend and foe, was briefly the same color. You hear that quiet now, and it's kind.
Names arrive. Delaney, who swore he'd moved to a place that never heard of snow, eventually did, and still mailed Christmas cards with a single line. Feet warm, heart too. The British lads who traded insults as if they were rations. The South Korean majors who toasted cold brothers with cups that steamed like promises. The Navy nurse at Busan who asked whether it was worth it, and later sent you a photo of her brother's grave, then a photo of her son learning to ride a bike. You keep both in the same envelope, because that's what history looks like at home scale. 2 pictures, and the space between them. Beneath the ice, water moves. You can't see it, but you trust the physics. Movement under stillness. That was the column. That was the division. That is the way courage behaves when the air burns your lungs. Almost invisible, never frozen, unstoppable by design. You press a glove to the ice the way you once pressed a palm to a bulkhead humming with the Meredith Victory's engines, and the message is the same. Hold together, go forward. On your walk back, you pass a small museum room. Glass case, a faded parka, a pair of taped-over boots, a bugle that looks too innocent to have ever been cruel. A docent explains to a knot of visitors how those ridges around a North Korean lake shaped the entire war's tempo. She gets the distances right, the dates right, the map arrows clean and sure. You nod along, grateful. When she finishes, a teenager asks the question you once asked yourself. Was it a defeat or a victory? You could say what you always say, that labels matter less than the people who carried them. Instead, you say, we were told to hold. We held long enough to bring everyone else through. Call it what you like. The docent smiles. The teenager frowns, thinking, that's enough. Outside, the light is churning the color of that cloth in your pocket. You take one more breath of ice-minted air, let it sting, let it sweeten, and start down the path. The past doesn't loosen its grip because you walk away. It loosens because you keep walking. You look back once, habit, and the lake is just a lake again. Still, if you stand very still and tilt your head to the wind, you can almost hear Barbara's voice across the years. Hold the pass. You do, in small ways, every day. Socks dry, humor handy, heart forward. The ridge is far, the winter elsewhere, and the courage, quiet as groundwater, outlasts them both. Let the air soften around you now. Let the hard angles of the mountains recede, the ridgelines rounding into silhouettes. The lake becoming only a mirror the evening lays down for the sky. Your shoulders drop a little. Your jaw unclenches. The wind that once carried bugles is only a hush at the window. No message in it, just a steady, soothing breath. You can set the weight down. Boots by the door, pack against the wall. Old stories folded the way you fold a map after a journey. What you needed to cross has been crossed. What needed holding has been held. The rest can be quiet without being forgotten. Notice the small things returning. The ordinary tick of a clock somewhere down the hall. The soft hum of your fan, round and patient. The faint warmth sitting in your hands, as if a cup were there even before you lift one. The room remembers you. The night makes room. If the snow shows up in your thoughts, let it fall in wider, slower flakes. Let it cover the trenches, the tire tracks, the splintered trees.
until the ground is one unbroken sheet and you can breathe without watching the breath go white. If the bugles come, let them drift farther off, turning into meadow wind, turning into nothing at all.
You did enough. You came far enough. You are, right now, exactly where you're supposed to be. Here, with a steady pulse and a story that can sleep. Feel the blankets grow heavier in the kind way. Feel the edges blur and the center hold. When you close your eyes, let the last light on the lake go gold, then silver, then dark, and keep only the calm.
Good night.